Hi, everybody. I'm here at the church on this warm June day, and it reminds me of coming here for Sunday services in the summer where, we're all sitting here sweating while we worship together. I don't miss the sweating part, but I do miss meeting together. I wanted to talk for a few minutes about having healthy boundaries in our lives. We all need healthy boundaries all the time, but especially more so during this time of pandemic. I want to look at the boundaries between work and rest, between work and play, between being alone and being with others, and between us as an individuals and God. So we all know we need boundaries between work and rest. We need to have healthy times of rest from our work, not just sleep, but just doing things that are not work. We see in Genesis 1 that God created, he worked for 6 days, and on the seventh day he rested. He commanded his followers, work for 6 days, that's good, but rest for 1 day. If we're working too much, or if we're resting too much, we're not going to find health or wholeness in our being. The temptation, of course, is to work a lot, to maybe to prove our worth, maybe to provide for our families, maybe to show that we're valuable to society. Maybe it's to save up to buy something. There's a whole bunch of reasons why people overwork, and maybe you just love your job so much. But the command for us and the challenge for us is to have healthy times of rest alongside our work. And I think this is even more important during this time of pandemic because now for many people who are working from home, they're working in the same place that they would rest. And I know people would often bring work from home to do in the evenings. And I mean, there needs to be boundaries there too. But it's especially important when you're working from home now to find places of rest. And so maybe that looks like, having an office in your home, or if you don't have one, to set up a makeshift office, or to be very strict with the hours that you're going to work. I'm going to work from these hours to these hours, and then I'm going to put everything aside and rest for a while. And maybe you come back to them later too, the work, but you have set hours for when you'll work. I'll work here and I'll work here, but I'm going to rest for here. You don't allow work to take over your life. At the same time, humans were created for play. And I want to use the terms play and rest synonymously here. So when I differentiate between work and rest, or work and play, I almost mean them synonymously, but there's healthy rest and there's unhealthy rest. There's the kind of unhealthy rest which is actually not life-giving. It's not rejuvenating. For me, that looks like just mindlessly surfing on the internet, scrolling through my blog feed or scrolling through Reddit. It could be watching TV or watching movies or even playing video games too long. Like there's a degree where it goes from being restful to just being mind-numbingly wasteful time. And humans were created to get life from work, to get life from play. And so doing those hobbies that we find life-giving, doing those activities or those projects, or reading a book, for example, or playing with your kids. For me, it's playing board games with others is a life-giving activity. And so whatever play looks like for you, maybe it means discovering what a hobby could be. Like, again, playing video games is fine within a degree or within a certain amount. Watching TV is fine, but it gets to a point where it's not restful anymore. It's just mind numbing and almost soul quenching. And so finding those activities or those hobbies that actually bring us life. And maybe if you don't know what yours is, it means experimenting with that. Maybe it could be going for a bike ride or doing art or the options are almost endless. But just as humans were created to work, we were created for play as well. And I do want to differentiate between play and rest, but I mean by play and rest is that they're both life-giving, not life-draining or neutral somehow. So sleep would be life-giving rest for sure, and getting a proper amount of sleep. The third boundary I want to look at is the boundary between being alone and being with others. Bonhoeffer, to paraphrase Bonhoeffer, he says in his book, Life Together, let the person who can't be alone with themselves beware of being in groups. Let the person who can't be in groups beware of being alone. And what he means by that is, again, here we need that balance of being alone and being with others. And this is especially hard during time of self-quarantine. Maybe you're living in a household and it's really hard to find that time by yourself. And you're gonna need to carve out some space, both time-wise and physical space, where you can be alone. Maybe it means going for a walk in a park. Maybe it means going for a drive. Maybe it means just telling your family or your roommates, look, I just need some time alone. I'm gonna be in this room. Please don't bother me for the next hour or the next 2 hours. And during that time alone, you can rest, you can play, like you can do life-giving activities, maybe reading or again, drawing, knitting, whatever. But again, we need that time away from others in order to be healthy and whole as people. And at the same time, if you don't have any roommates, if you don't have any family and you're quarantined in your apartment by yourself, it's so important for you to reach out to others. And I know it's harder. The borders are opening up a little bit here in Manitoba, or quite a bit actually. So you can go out with people and meet them in the park or go for a bike ride or hang out together, with proper social distancing. But it's so important for you to make that effort to reach out to someone else and say, hey man, can we chat? Or hey, can we get together? And spend some time with others. And again, we need that time. We're made for community. We're created for community. Adam was very alone. Even though he had all these animals with him, he was very alone until God created Eve to be with him. And so we don't just need to be alone, but we also need to be with others, with community. And the fourth boundary that I want to look at is the boundary between us and God. And here we've talked about healthy boundaries between work and rest, between work and play, and between being alone and being others. But the boundary between us and God, any boundary between us and God as followers of Jesus, is actually the unhealthy boundary. For Christians, we must not have any boundaries between us and God. God created us to be in communion with him. It was our boundaries, if you will, our sin that said, no, I want to be on my own. I want to be in charge of my own life. I want to be in control. I want to be the master of my own fate. And we put this boundary between us and God. Jesus came to break the boundary, to bring us back into communion with God. But as humans, our temptation is still to say, God, you can only have, this much of me and no more, or you can only go this far and no more. But that's not going to work with Jesus. He says in Paul says in Romans 12, verses 1 and 2, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers and sisters, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual act of worship. And this living sacrifice idea, back in ancient times when they would make animal sacrifices to God, or in other religions now where they make animal sacrifices to God, that thing is killed or dead, or if it's plants or whatever, it's burnt. Like it is just destroyed. And what Paul is saying here is to consider ourselves dead to ourselves. I think he talks about that somewhere else, so that we would be alive to Christ. And so as a living sacrifice, it's my heart is completely open to God. My will is completely open to what God wants me to do. And I'm not saying, God, you can only have this much of me and no more. God, you can have my Sundays, but you can't have my Monday to Friday. You can have my non-working time, but my working time is for me. No, all of it has to be for God and open to him. And that's where we find true life. That's where we stay connected to Jesus and receive the life that he gives, receive the power that the Spirit gives when we're open to Jesus and have no boundaries with him. I was thinking of, there's a passage in Isaiah 48 that I want to read. And it's similar to what I'm saying here. It's Isaiah 48, verses 17 and 18. Thus says the Lord, your Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel, I am the Lord your God, who teaches you for your own good. Some translations say for your own best or for your success. So I am the one who teaches you for your own good, who leads you in the way you should go. Oh, that you had paid attention to my commandments. Then your prosperity would have been like a river, and your success like the waves of the sea. The promise is, as we remove the boundaries in our lives to Jesus, and as we obey God's commands, as we walk in his ways, as we do his will, that we will be successful. Our prosperity would have been like the river, and your success like the waves of the sea. It doesn't mean that we're not working, because of course we're working. It doesn't mean we're not playing. It doesn't mean we're not resting. It doesn't mean we're not being alone. We're not being with others. But in all of these areas, we are completely surrendered. We're completely dead to ourselves and alive to Christ and alive to his will and obedient to his commands. And then we will find true life, and we'll find true wholeness and health that even having these other three proper boundaries won't give us on their own. Well, I think that's it for me. I pray that you would find healthy boundaries, including the boundary of no boundaries with Jesus, and would be able to find life and healing and rest in them. I am for you. I'm praying for you. God bless, and I'll see you soon.